Too many lives are lost at the construction job site, especially on highway construction projects. AGC surveyed more than 800 road building construction firms across the country. And believe this, 39% had experienced a vehicle crash into their work zone this past year alone. How can we encourage motorists to slow down and create safer job sites for all of you workers? Can technologies lend a helping hand and keep workers safer? This is what I want to explore today here on this segment of the show. I'd like to identify how to make road projects a little bit safer with the help of technology. So to help me address all of this, I have a special guest with me today. He started his professional career teaching second grade, part of the Teach for America program. He also handled public affairs for the U.S. Department of Transportation. Today, he is the Vice President of Public Affairs and Strategic Initiatives at the AGC. I'm so excited to have Brian Turmail of the AGC join me today. Brian, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Peggy. I appreciate you having me on.
So, Brian, let's talk about this. Some of these numbers that we talk about in construction are pretty discouraging. In fact, I'm looking at some of them right now, and it says that firms that had experienced crashes, 18% resulted in construction worker injury, 44% resulted in driver or passenger injury, 6% resulted in worker fatality, 12% resulted in driver or passenger fatality. Tell me about these. These are pretty scary numbers when I think about this overall.
No, that's absolutely right. If you talk to any contractor that's involved in highway or transportation construction work, unfortunately, they all have a very similar story of having some kind of tragic accident take place at one or many of their job sites where a worker was injured, or in some awful cases, workers were killed, and frankly, what happens with even greater frequency is that the people driving their vehicles through these work zones, who are speeding, who aren't paying attention, who are distracted, who aren't as focused as they need to be in the changing environment of a work zone, are getting hurt, or they're getting killed, or they're hurting their passengers or killing their passengers. And we've been spending a lot of time really trying to impress upon people that you have to be very careful in a work zone. It's not like driving on a regular highway lane.
So what can we do? I mean, that's really important. We want people to be safe, but what are we really doing to encourage people to do the right things when they go through these work zones?
That's absolutely right. We've been involved, AGC of America has been involved for over a decade now with a coalition of groups that has really been pushing highway work zone safety. There is, of course, a Highway Work Zone Safety Week, but we feel like this is an issue that's year-round. So earlier this year, we launched a nationwide radio advertising campaign where we basically aired ads at the beginning of the summer driving season saying, hey, look, when you're going through a highway work zone, slow down, put the phone down, and pay attention. A lot of these stories that contractors have are someone got disoriented and ended up in the wrong lane and then went through an orange cone and hit a driver, or hit a worker. The other thing that we're doing is there was actually, as part of the most recent transportation law that was passed, the federal government should be spending money, investing money in putting in place what we call positive barriers, in real world terms, Jersey barriers, that separate workers from drivers in most work zones. And the federal government has actually dragged its feet on implementing that rule because they're worried about the cost. But our argument is you cannot put a price tag on the life or the safety of a construction worker or on the life or safety of a driver or their passenger.
That scares me that you're telling me people are worried about cost when it comes to people's lives. The cost of a life is way more than the idea of worrying about trying to save money. Isn't that what we're talking about?
It's exactly right. And only in Washington can you actually have people whose job it is to put a dollar figure on the value of a life and make decisions about safety. But the other point that we've been making, and some of the data that we talk about in those surveys that we put out every year on highway work zone safety, is that there's not just a cost in human terms, which should obviously be the main decision, but each one of those accidents causes significant delays to traffic, to construction schedules, damage to equipment. So if you absolutely have to do this in a financial decision making, you need to take into account the broader cost of a highway work zone accident, what it does to traffic, what it does to commerce, what it does to the cost of a construction project, in addition to this unspeakable damage that it's done to the lives of families and the health and safety of our workforce. And we're going to keep pushing in Washington for the feds to do their part. And in the meantime, contractors just don't wait for others to solve their problems. That's why we're out there really working to educate the driving public and make sure they understand that they've got skin in this game and that they're most likely to get hurt or killed in a work zone, and they need to be careful driving through one.
AGC does a really good job, and one of the things, not only trying to educate, but you guys spend a lot of time looking at technology, looking at the educational process from just in a whole different ways. What about technology? Are we doing enough to encourage the use of technology to play its part in this?
That's a great question, and there is a lot of exciting new technology that's now become available to improve the safety of highway work zones. And a lot of those have been developed by our member firms working with the tech sector because they're so committed to finding a way to make those work zones, those highway work zones, even safer. Among the things we've seen are essentially, if you will, like sort of, think of Mission Impossible and those lasers that Tom Cruise was trying to avoid, like laser beams that set up around the perimeter of a work zone. And if someone crosses that laser, every vest on every worker immediately starts to vibrate as a way to say, look up, look around, there's a car coming your way right now, get out of the way. The other thing that we've got is just sensing equipment, so that if there's a piece of equipment, a vehicle coming near you, it shakes your vest, it vibrates your helmet, so that you know to look up and look around. Because one of the things about highway work zones is they're loud. You're next to a highway, you're next to a big piece of yellow equipment. You may not hear that car coming in that you would if you were at a park on a Sunday, playing football with your kids. So we want to make sure that we've got every possible way to alert workers that a car's coming. The other thing that technology can help us is, it's a little Orwellian, but anyone who's using a cell phone when they drive through a work zone, if they regularly drive through a work zone, we know that they're passing through a work zone. So you can actually identify commuters whose commuting trips take them through a work zone, and then find a time when they're not driving to send them messages or alerts to their phone saying, hey, we know you're going to be going through I-95 later today, or we know you like to drive on I-95, and there's a work zone at mile 50. Please be careful, put this phone down, pay attention, and remember the speed limit's 35 or whatever the posted speed limit is, so that we can actually identify just the people going through that work zone on a regular basis and reach out to them and make that extra effort to say, hey, please be careful. It's your life. It's our folks' lives at risk here, and do the right thing.
I love the idea that you're thinking about those repeaters that go through that construction zone on a regular basis, because you have those regular commuters. But think about this from a bigger way. We talk about that driver distraction idea. Do we think we need more legislation? I mean, I know you're right there in Virginia, and that's where you guys are based, and you're right there in the heart of all of government, right? And thinking about that, do we want more legislation, or do we want to put more of the responsibility on the individual driver and say, look, let's not legislate this. Let's put more personal responsibility on each individual driver to start doing more of to keep our workers safe? Or do we have to think about legislation?
I think a lot of we could probably do a bit more at state legislative efforts. A number of our chapters have been involved in pushing back against efforts to almost decriminalize speeding or driving distracted through work zones. In North Carolina, our chapter had to fight back an effort to say, hey, we're only going to charge higher speeding tickets in work zones if you can prove there's a worker present. But even if you're not doing major construction, there's almost always a worker at a job site, even if they're just doing an inspection, or even if they're there picking up the barrels. So you don't really want to start peeling back those protections. So yes, on the legislative side, there's more that we can do to have proactive measures or to fight silly laws getting put in place. Driver education is absolutely vital and kind of the core of what we've been focused on, which is reminding drivers to be more alert and more careful. And the other thing is law enforcement. They generally are great partners with us. And obviously you can't have a police officer at every highway work zone. But a number of states have begun putting in place speeding cameras randomly placed at highway work zones. And we've found those to be a particularly effective tool. And you get around having to deploy a state trooper at every work zone, which you know is not feasible. At the same time, you send a pretty loud and clear message. If you drive through this work zone and you're speeding, you're going to get a ticket in the mail, and then you're going to play the game of figuring out who was driving the car that day and who's writing the check for the ticket, right? So that's a great deterrent. That's a relatively low cost for the state, and one that sends a pretty clear message to drivers: hey, be careful. You got to absolutely slow down in those work zones. And so I guess really the answer to your question is yes, all of the above.
And you know what, Ken, I love having you on this. I mean, Brian, I love having you on the show talking about all these amazing things, because if we think about worker safety and we think about what we have to do in keeping our workers safe, that's the most things. Brian Turmail, I love having you with us. You're the Vice President of Public Affairs and Strategic Initiatives at AGC. Thank you so much for all your time today.
Hey, thanks for having me, and thanks for talking about what is a really important issue to the industry. So we appreciate it.
All right. Well, that's our Safety Zone for today.